Good evening, everyone. I am Rabbi Mika Simmerly from Temple Bet Tikva. It is my true honor to have everyone joining us this evening for this saying goodbye to our Rabbi Emeritus. And you'll see your screens change as more and more people are joining us. At this time, we would like to ask of everyone to keep themselves muted, please. And when it is time to speak at the very end, you will be invited to unmute. Avi, take it away.
Toda, Rabbi. So let me just explain logistically how things are going to work. Well, first, let me thank you all for being here also on behalf of our whole family. Basically, each night, we're going to be gathering here all 7 nights, except for this coming Erev Shabbat, Friday night, when there will not be a Shiva. And the format for each night is going to be a brief service, about 20 minutes, mourner's service, followed by one or more featured speakers who we've scheduled for each night. I feel like giving coming attractions. I mean, tomorrow we're going to be having Rabbi David Saperstein. Then there are many highlights. That's one. I don't have the whole list in front of me. Tonight we're going to be hearing from Marvin Chazek. And Thursday we will be hearing from Andrew Young. So, you know, some of you may want to be repeat offenders, depending on who is speaking. But of course, you're welcome to come to any and all of the above. And after the featured speakers, we will then open it up to everyone. I would ask that you make yourself known to the host. Dawn, I don't know how you're listed. Are you listed as host or as Dawn?
Temple Bet Tikva.
Okay, so make yourself known in the chat to Temple Bet Tikva as someone who would like to speak. We ask that you keep it brief if you can. If you want to think about it, and then you can think about it, maybe write something and come back for one of the other nights, and that may be a time saver. We're going to cut everything off at about 90 minutes each night. So if we start at 7 each evening, we'd like to be done by 8:30. If you did not get a chance to speak and you made yourself known to Dawn, to Temple Bet Tikva in the chat, she will keep a list and she will make sure that you make it to the top of the list for the subsequent evening. So hopefully everybody will get a chance to get their say. I should also note in terms of the service leaders that Rabbi Mika will be leading tonight, Cantor Ramalis will be leading tomorrow, and then each of the remaining 5 nights, we will have different guest rabbis leading from different parts of our life and of Dad's life. So that should be quite special also. It's going to be an all-star cast of service leaders and speakers, and we're thrilled to have that, and we're thrilled to hear from all of you as well. So I think that's everything in terms of the logistics. So Rabbi, if you want to take it away with the service, we can get started.
Thank you so much, Avi, and thank you again, everyone, for being here with us. I just wanted to mention that at any time, if anyone would like to communicate a memory or anything at all to the family, please feel free to do so at any time via chat. You probably are aware that the service is being recorded, and so will the chat. So let us begin. We are assembled with our friends in the shadow that has fallen on their home. We raise our voices together in prayer to the source of life, asking for comfort and strength. We need light when gloom darkens our home, To whom shall we look if not to the creator of light? We need fortitude and courage when pain and loss assail us. Where shall we find them if not in the thought of the one who preserves all that is good from destruction? Who among us has not passed through trials and bereavements? Some bear fresh wounds in their hearts and therefore feel more keenly the kinship of sorrow. Others whose days of mourning are more remote still recall the comfort that sympathy brought to their sorrowing hearts. All things pass. All that lives must die. All that we prize is but lent to us, and the time comes when we must surrender it. We are travelers on the same road that leads to the same end. And so this evening, we will refer to some of our ancient liturgy to honor a Rabbi Emeritus who grew up Orthodox. Some of these melodies will sound familiar to some of you. Some will sound a little strange. Whenever we read Hebrew or chant it, we will also attach an English translation or interpretation to the ancient liturgy. And so if it is your custom, and if it is available to you this evening, I invite you to now rise if you're able, or please remain seated as we continue with the Baruchu. Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed. There are times when the love of God burns so powerfully within your heart that the words of prayer seem to rush forth quickly and without deliberation. At such times, it is not you yourself who speaks. Rather, it is through you that the words are spoken. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim b'chokhma potech she'arim ובתבונה משנה עיתים ומחליף את הזמנים ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו. O God, you are as near as the very air we breathe, yet farther than the farthermost star. We yearn to reach you. We seek the light and warmth of your presence. Though we say you are near, we are lonely and alone. Oh, let our desire be so strong that it will tear the veil that keeps you from our sight. Let your light release our darkness and reveal the glory and joy of your presence. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. Praise to you, Adonai, who brings on the evening. I will now continue with the watchword of our people, Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever. If you have been standing for the Shema and the Baruchu, you may be seated now. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. You should love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that you shall remember to observe all of God's commandments and be holy to your God. And God said, I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. And God said, I am Adonai your God. Adonai Elohechem Emet. I'd like to dedicate this song that was written by Chana Senesh, one of our heroic female soldiers who gave her life in the early 1900s. And this is Eli, Eli, O God, my God. And I know that Rabbi Dresner truly enjoyed this piece of beautiful melodic prayer. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam. החול והים, רישוש של המים, בירק השמיים, תפילת האדם. החול והים, רישוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. O God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of our hearts, the crash of the sea, the rush of the waters, the sand and the heavens, the prayer of our heart. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam. Give us a place to rest, O God. Bring us into shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, v'ha'amidenu shomreinu lechayim, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. For with you are true protection and safety, and in your presence is gentle love. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace, over all we love, over Jerusalem. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, guardian of the people in our world. Baruch atah Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael, v'chol amei tevel. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel and the people in our world. Yitkadal veyitkadash shemei Rabba, ve'alma divra chirutei ve'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei chol bet Yisrael. Agala, uvizman kariv, v'imeru, amen. Yehi shmera b'mevorach, le'olam ul'olem me'alemaya, yitbarach, yitbarach, ve'yishtabach, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה V'imeru, amen. Teach me, O God, a blessing, a prayer on the mystery of a withered leaf, on the ripened fruit so fair, on the freedom to see, to sense, to breathe, to know, to hope, to despair. Teach my lips a blessing, a hymn of praise, as each morning and night you renew your days, lest my day be today as the one before, lest routine set my ways. Again, if it is available to you this evening, and if it is your custom, I'd like to invite you now to rise as we continue with the Amidah, also known as the Tefillah. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Eternal God, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your glory. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohe avoteinu ve'imotenu, Elohe Avraham, Elohe Yitzchak, ve'Elohe Yaakov, Elohe Sarah, Elohe Rivka, Elohe Rachel ve'Elohe Leah, Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor ve'Hanora, Ele Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'koneh HaKol, Ve'zocher Chasdei Avot ve'Imarot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'nehem, Lema'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer, Umoshia Umagen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah. Prayer invites God's presence to suffuse our spirits, God's will to prevail in our lives. Prayer may not bring water to parched fields, nor mend a broken bridge, nor rebuild a ruined city, but prayer can water an arid soul, mend a broken heart, rebuild a weakened will. Baruch atah Adonai, mechayer hakol. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kadoshim bechol yom yalelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. To conclude the tefillah, also known as the Amidah, I now invite you to sit back down if you've been standing for the tefillah, and I will recite a couple of words of Shalom Rav, abundance of peace, and then I will move to reciting a couple of prayers dedicated specifically to the house of mourners. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim le'olam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim le'olam. Ki ata hu melech Adon, lechol hashalom. Ki ata hu melech Adon, lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim le'olam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim le'olam. We say shalom and not goodbye, for shalom is goodbye and hello and wholeness and peace, all threaded together in one breath. And in one breath, we too say goodbye. Goodbye to a hand to hold, a kiss, and a tight embrace. And in the same breath of shalom, we say hello. Hello to an ocean of memories and a rush of emotion, gratitude and sorrow, tears and laughter, and trembling and fatigue, all in one breath. We say shalom and not goodbye, for shalom is goodbye and hello and wholeness and peace. Psalm 23, I will recite these ancient words of Psalm 23, first in Hebrew, and then I will deliver the English translation, the traditional one. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bino'ot asher yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, yanchani v'ma'aglei tzedek, lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begeitz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha u'mishantecha hema, yenachamuni. Ta'aruch lefanai shulchan neged tzorai. Tishanta v'shemen roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God maketh me to lie down in green pastures. God leadeth me beside the still waters. God restoreth my soul. God guideth me in straight paths of God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Again, this beautiful poem was composed by Chana Senesh, and this really pertains to our Rabbi Emeritus Dresner, who was a star among stars. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. And indeed, we shall remember our beloved Sai. Now, as I come to the conclusion of the memorial service of this Shiva Minyan service, the religious part that is, I will recite El Malei Rechamim first in Hebrew, when I will read Sai Dresner's Hebrew name, and then I will read the English translation. And then we will conclude with Mourner's Kaddish. Again, if this is your custom, and if it is available to you this evening, I invite you to please rise or please remain seated. El Malei Rechamim, shochen b'mrumim, חמצה מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה. אם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע, מזכירים את נשמת הרב ישראל שמואל בן אברהם ותמר, שהלך לעולמו. אנא בעל הרחמים, יסתיריהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. God, full of compassion, you dwell in the heights and in the depths. Grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence to Harav Shmuel, Yisrael Shmuel ben Avraham Vetamar, to Rabbi Sai Dresner, our loved one who has entered eternity. Let him find refuge forever in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. For you, the everlasting God, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. And I'll invite you to recite along together with me the ancient words of Kaddish Yatom, mourners Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash mei rabba, be'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chaychon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv ve'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam ul'olmei almaya, yitbarach ve'yishtabach, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all of Israel, to which we all say together, amen. And this, my friends, concludes the religious part of our evening. And before I hand over the microphone to Avi and our speakers for this morning, I'd like to open this section with a short memory and a story about my beloved friend, Rabbi Dresner. 2 years ago, around this time of year, when beloved temple member Marcia Bograd was gravely ill, Rabbi Dresner and I came to see her and husband Joe, now also of blessed memory, at their house in Pompton Lakes. Marcia was fast asleep. She couldn't wake up. She was so exhausted from all the radiation treatments that she had to endure. Joe urged us to try and wake her up, and when we couldn't, Rabbi Dresner decided that what will wake her up for sure is him singing to her in his booming voice. This happened just before MLK weekend, and Sai said that the only song he could ever sing in tune was "We Shall Overcome." And now you can probably understand why I'm sharing this story. And so we did. And it was one of the most painfully funniest thing I have ever witnessed in my entire career. And I was crying and I was laughing at the same time. Sai's singing getting louder by the minute, with more gusto, with more conviction, and Marcia snoring lightly along, almost in rhythm with our singing. Picture this: 2 Caucasian rabbis sitting side by side, singing their hearts out, an old African-American spiritual, to try and wake up Marcia Bograd. We shall overcome someday. Sai, my dear friend, who I am not embarrassed to call Abba, and whose biological children never corrected me. Sai, you overcame an ailing body, and now you are truly free. We shall live in peace one day, but you are living in peace right now for eternity, wherever it is that you are. Sai, my husband Dave and I don't have a long history with you to speak of. Just know how incredibly honored I feel to have been in your sweet and kind presence for the past 6 years. Thank you for being such an important part in my growth as a rabbi, but most importantly, my growth as a human being. You've been there with and for us since the moment I stepped on the bima at Temple Beth Tikva. If there is one thing I am eternally grateful to you for, it is your constant, everlasting kindness towards Dave and myself, and I promise to pay it forward. תודה רבה מקרב לב, איש אהוב ויקר, שלך באהבה רבה.
I guess that's my cue. So I thought we were going to have two speakers tonight, but one of them is not here. We're going to reschedule to another night, no problem. So we only have one speaker, and I should note, in terms of the speakers, these were not the speakers that we picked, Tamar and I, not that we wouldn't have. These were the speakers that our father wanted to speak. Those of you who read the forward article and saw some of the other press will know that we planned everything with him. The eulogy that I delivered today, I delivered for him, except for the first part, which was more impromptu. But the main eulogy he heard his obituary, which many of you have read. And the speakers, he told us who he wanted to speak, and did he want them to speak at the funeral? Did he want them to speak at the Shloshim, et cetera, et cetera. So we are honoring his wishes. And one of the people that he wanted to speak was his friend Marvin Chazek, who is here with us in the top hand left of my screen. I don't know where he is in yours. But I will not steal his thunder and tell you how they knew each other, because I'll let him spell out what it stands for. But Marvin, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Avi. And thank you, Rabbi, for a very moving service. Cy Dresner was a friend. He lunched and he debated with the Romeos for almost 20 years. Romeos, retired old men eating out. We did every week, every Thursday for over 20 years. We were a small group, never more than 8. Jews, Christians, atheists. We were scientists and engineers, mostly from Bell Labs. We got to know Cy beyond the nationally known rabbi that he was. There was the historian. There was the avid newsreader. There was the man of faith. He was our walking Wikipedia. We will miss him. There was politics and literature to discuss. There was science. There was Israel. There was baseball and the New York Giants, his father's favorite team. He made sure we celebrated our birthdays, always remembering each date. We will miss him. I remember one year we had a Romeo Passover Seder. One of our non-Jewish Romeos, curious about the ritual, offered to host. We all brought the appropriate dishes and wine, and of course, Cy officiated. His commentary on the Exodus was like his sermons, longer than the Haggadah. We feared we might have to stay up until the morning Shema. At lunches, we often invited one of our children or our grandchildren, if they were in town, to meet with us and join in the conversation at lunch. My grandson, Sam, joined us several times, and he commented after one of the lunches, "You Bell Labs guys always talk a lot about the current political moments and events in our country. The rabbi always had a strong opinion, grounded in historical and biblical precedent. Sam also noted that kind of textual approach was at odds with the rest of the group, since you were all very analytical, as scientists tend to be. In the rabbi's world, politics, history, and Jewish law were inseparable and unassailable. And that came through in almost everything he said. Sam was right. We will miss him. Sai was a proud Jew, a labor Zionist, and an advocate of equality. His primary purpose in life, as he often said, was to repair the world, tikkun olam, not a small task. His calling was to be a rabbi, a preacher, a powerful voice for democracy and equality. He recognized early that the civil rights movement would be the great moral crusade of our time. He recognized early that Martin Luther King Jr. would be the prophetic moral leader of that crusade. He recognized early that the battle would be fought on the front lines, and he had to be there. That was long before we knew him. But his past was always with him, and to a large extent made him the historical figure that he is. At one of our Romeo luncheons, we asked him when he was going to write his autobiography. He reminded us of the trove of clippings he had and said it was all there, his life, all on paper. He didn't have to write it. Well, Sai was not a writer. He was a speaker. He was a marcher. He was an activist. When the Southern leadership needed a powerful Jewish voice, they called on Sai. When he spoke, people listened. When he marched, people followed. But who was Sai? Was he just a rabbi from a modest synagogue in a New Jersey suburb? No, not so. His world of tikkun olam had no boundaries. Civil rights called to him. Labor Zionist training, activist picketing, and early arrests formed him. A revolution was brewing in the 60s, and Sai was ready. He was fearless. It was his time. June 16, 1964, Rabbi Israel Dresner stood before his rabbinic colleagues at the 75th annual gathering of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the governing body of the Reform movement, to read a telegram from Martin Luther King asking that the rabbis join him in protest in St. Augustine, Florida, to bear prophetic witness against the social evils of our time. King emphasized that a delegation of some 30 or so rabbis would make a tremendous impact on the community and the nation. King's telegram was terse. He had dictated it through the bars of his jail cell. And the rest, as we know, is history. At our Algonquin-like roundtable, we Romeos knew Sai as a voice of history and politics, who was saddened by the reactionary developments in modern Israel and in our nation. His booming voice often attracted the ears of people who sat near us. When Sai spoke, they all listened. He was curious about topics that we scientists and engineers often brought to the table, an area that he confessed he knew little about. Last month, Sai told us about his cancer. He was proud that he had lived a good and productive life. He retained his faith, he retained his Yiddishkeit, and he was true to tikkun olam. He was not sad. He had no regrets. We will miss him.
Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you, Marvin.
Marvin, I already have your remarks, but I'm going to say to those of our speakers for moving forward, we want to have your remarks. So if you would email them to me, doesn't have to be ahead of time, just in general, we want to have them. And we can probably make all of this stuff available on the synagogue website as well. So Dawn, I guess you've been keeping track. People have been contacting you. So you have a list of people who would like to speak and we'd like to listen. So by all means, tell the appropriate people to unmute.
Okay, the next one is Diane Frank. And I'm gonna spotlight her.
First of all, deep condolences to everyone in the Dresner family. I met Rabbi Dresner when I was 10 years old. I'm one of the people that Avi calls the Shari Shalom kids. And Rabbi Dresner inspired us in terms of Black Lives Matter. Black lives have always mattered. We grew up that way. He would go on freedom rides. Then, next Friday night, we'd hear about all sorts of things. And my dad was with him for the March on Washington, along with bringing Martin Luther King twice to Springfield to speak to us, which was just so inspiring. He also brought Gloria Steinem. That was my first introduction to the women's liberation movement. And he signed my prayer book. He came to our house for dinner. And he also chose other books for me to read. One of them was a linear Hebrew book, which had the Hebrew on one and then the English on the next column, because he wanted me to know what I was saying when I prayed. I was religious, and at that time, women couldn't go to seminary and become rabbis, but he was sort of coaching me in that direction. And he continues to be an inspiration for all of us. The Shari Shalom kids, we've all been in touch. We've all been sharing stories about how much he inspires us and continues to inspire us. And this is for our whole lives. Thank you. Blessings, blessings, blessings to Rabbi Dresner.
Avi, no one else has stepped forward. I think everybody is shy.
It's okay. I mean,
Actually, Paula Ridner would like to speak. If I can find her. There she is.
I'd like to share a very special moment about Rabbi Dresner. Before becoming principal at Temple Beth Tikva's religious school, I worked at Glenfield Middle School in Montclair, New Jersey. Celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Day in January is a yearly tradition. A school-wide assembly is scheduled. The Glenfield Choir, Orchestra, and Dance Ensemble delight the audience with their outstanding competency and skills. Students read poems and essays, and there is a featured speaker. Since it is Martin Luther King Day weekend, I asked Rabbi Dresner if he would like the honor of being the guest speaker at the Martin Luther King Assembly, and without hesitation, he said yes. Perfect. Rabbi Dresner graced the Glenfield Middle School stage 3 times in 3 consecutive years as the guest speaker. First on January 15, 2016. Second on January 13, 2017, and third on January 12, 2018. The assemblies were all held at Glenfield Middle School on a Friday before the actual holiday, which is celebrated on the third Monday in January, and it's coming up, as a matter of fact, tomorrow. At the podium on stage stood Rabbi Dresner in front of an amazing 750 students, teachers, parents, town and state officials, and people traveling from afar to hear Rabbi Dresner, our guest speaker, about his involvement in the civil rights movement and especially his friendship with Dr. Martin Luther King. Pictures of Rabbi Dresner standing with Dr. King, as well as with Michelle and Barack Obama, were projected on the very large stage for all to see. It was very impressive. Rabbi Dresner spoke about his time in the 1960s as a civil rights activist, how he joined the Freedom Riders, telling numerous stories with specific dates and times with his close friend, Dr. King, and others involved in the movement. His voice projected loud and clear, and he didn't need a microphone. Rabbi Dresner mesmerized each and every person sitting or standing in the auditorium. Preaching, he was singing songs and enlightening all to what actually happened at that time in history. The audience was clapping, cheering, yelling out words of encouragement and standing up for Rabbi Dresner, who was their hero. They loved him. He made a tremendous impact to all that attended the assemblies over the years, honoring Dr. King. He brought his words and pictures alive out of the children's history books, so relevant and meaningful for especially all the middle schoolers there at Glenfield School. I want to thank him for sharing in such detail the behind-the-scenes stories, his friendship with Dr. King, the clergy, and people involved in the civil rights movement. It was a poignant and priceless experience for all, one they'll never forget. My former colleagues still talk about it to this day. The lasting impression Rabbi Dresner made by simply being there. It was a pleasure to know, to honor him, to hear his words, his personal convictions, and courage to organize with others against all odds. He was truly an inspiration for shaping history, and I thank him for his wisdom, insight, and spiritual guidance and friendship. May he rest in peace.
You know, if
Next,
people aren't, oh, somebody signed up, because I was gonna say, I'm gonna start calling on people.
no, Don Lewis would like to speak.
Thank you. First of all, before that, I just want to say that when my younger son, Sasha, was looking at the list of names, he excitedly said to me, John Lewis is here. And we looked at the screen and we said, Sasha, it's Don Lewis. So,
Oh. Well, Rabbi Dresner was my rabbi at Shari Shalom in my teen years in Springfield. And I'd like to share just a couple of personal experiences we had that shed light on what he was like and what he was like for us teens. The first one is that he invited a few of us teens to go with him for the last day of the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. But he said, of course, you need to get your parents' permission. Well, my parents were out of the country at the time and incommunicado, and my grandmother was staying with me and my younger brother. And I knew she was pretty, very protective of us. And I wasn't sure she would say okay, because it was dangerous. It was after the very brutal first march from Selma. So I went to her and I just said, Grandma, I'm going somewhere with the rabbi tomorrow, okay? And she said, fine, and didn't contact him, didn't anything. So we went. We flew to Selma or nearby that morning and marched to Montgomery to hear the speeches from the state capitol steps, and flew back that night. But it was a very powerful experience. Another very personal experience that I had with Rabbi Dresner was, I was maybe 15 or 16. I was interested in existentialism, although I'm not sure I knew what it was. But it was somehow related to the beatniks, which I thought at the time was really cool. And I had heard about this author named Albert Camus. Well, Rabbi Dresner's office was just, every wall was covered with books. And I noticed a book by Albert Camus on the shelf in his office. So I said, can I borrow this book? And he said, you're too young. You can read it when you're older. Well, of course, that afternoon I went to the nearby bookstore and bought a copy. But I sort of never forgave him, but I did forgive him for not being willing to lend me the book. And the final memory was very, very early in the Vietnam War. I think there were only maybe a handful of US soldiers there. And at the time, activists were doing what we call teach-ins about the Vietnam War to try to educate the American people. So Rabbi Dresner wanted to have a teach-in Friday night services. And he asked me, so he was going to have a debate and choose one congregation member to be in favor of the war and another one to be against the war. So I'm not sure why, but he asked me if I would be the debater against the war. And the only reason I can think of is that somehow he knew I was in the debate society at my high school. But I knew absolutely nothing of Vietnam. I hadn't even really heard about it. But I educated myself. I'd read a great deal about it at his behest. And he picked my father's best friend to be the one in favor of the war. So he and my father's friend, Joe Bender, had this debate. Well, it was a very, very educational experience for me, and led to my activities in the coming years in protest of the war. And finally, one other memory, and maybe it's the strongest one I have about Rabbi Dresner. It had nothing to do with his activism, but during the Shabbat services, when there was a time for private silent prayer, he would sit in his chair on the bima and adopt a pose. Well, the only way I can describe it is like Rodin's statue of the thinker. Some of you may have seen him do this, but the intensity of his prayer just radiated out even to those of us who were sitting in the seats in the congregation. And, in retrospect, that feeling, that intensity, maybe was his biggest impact on me and on many others at the same time. So those are just a few of my memories of Rabbi Dresner, and he had a big effect in those respects on me for the rest of my life. So I haven't seen him, since probably since since he left Sherry Shalom. But I think of him often, and I thought of him a great deal when I heard about his illness and his passing.
Thank you. I asked my dad once what he was thinking about and praying for when he was doing his thinker routine. And he said it was for the Mets to win the World Series, but it only worked. So that was a joke.
Avi, I have another speaker. Forgive me if I'm saying his name wrong. Charney.
Correct. Thank you. Hello, Avi. It's so many years. I have two reminiscences about Cy. I was the executive director of Emeritus USA, and I had the privilege of coordinating our annual Israel Symposia, which usually included a visit to a neighboring Arab country. While my memory doesn't remember the particular years, Cy would know, because nobody had a memory as unfailing as his. Two incidents reflect aspects of his character that are still a marvel to me these many years since. In the year that Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak last stood for re-election, our group went to meet with his director of security and the man who temporarily succeeded him some years later, General Omar Suleiman. We met him at an ornate green marble headquarters at the head of a vast security compound where we were told some 20,000 security prisoners languished in underground cells. Just the week before, the one Egyptian member of parliament courageous enough to challenge Mubarak, Ayman Noor, had been arrested and was no doubt in a cell not far from where we were meeting with Suleiman. In characteristic fashion, Cy asked Suleiman why Noor was in prison, and Suleiman answered that Noor would only be released if he was found not guilty. Cy emphatically and without hesitation said that a person accused of a crime is considered innocent until found guilty, to which Suleiman replied that in Egypt, a person is considered guilty until the court finds otherwise, and is consequently held until trial. So in the belly of the beast, without hesitation and with total confidence in his position and values he held, Cy argued vigorously, not backing off in any way. I have no idea what the repercussions of Cy's challenge to Suleiman had to relations between our friends in Meretz, who had arranged our meeting, and the government of Egypt. But I can't imagine it was not the subject of discussions about whether to entertain such contentious American guests in the future. For those of us who witnessed the exchange, our awe and pride in Cy's devotion to principle and the way he spoke truth to power were confirmed and magnified by this remarkable episode. If this incident was serious and profound in demonstrating Cy's devotion to democratic principles, a different episode in one of our side trips to Jordan hinged at the fulcrum of the near comic and the near tragic. On this occasion, we were staying at an elite hotel in Amman at the very time that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was also staying there. Although we were always cost conscious, I was able to book rooms for only $10 more a night than at the nearby Marriott. So we were in a very unusual place. To make our various appointments, we had engaged 2 minivans and drivers, and they were awaiting our group at 8 p.m. one evening for a reservation at a restaurant too far away to walk. As he had throughout the time in Jordan, Cy was in constant conversation in the hotel lobby with another participant, Stephen Scheuer, a brilliant 80-year-old, as was Cy. Stephen Scheuer was part of the Scheuer family. He was the first person to review films on television many, many years ago. And the two of them were in constant discussion. My wife, Sharon, was charged with making sure the two of them would get to the vans. And I had already guided the rest of our group out just as the Saudi Crown Prince was coming in. Sharon finally got Steve and Cy to their feet and headed out the revolving door, Cy in the lead and Sharon at the rear. Parked outside the door was the Crown Prince's security van, pretty much identical to the vans we used, but were parked 50 yards away. But Cy went directly to the security van, bristling with rifles, climbing in, oblivious, one can assume, to the fact that the van was not populated by other members of our group, but by several heavily armed and more than a little alarmed security people. Happily, Sharon was able to pull Cy out, thereby averting what might have been an international incident with possibly dire consequences. In any case, I was assured that all was well by the fact that Cy and Stephen were seated in our van and they were still engaged in their ongoing discussion as if nothing had happened. On a personal note, I must mention that Cy was instrumental in bringing me to what was then known as the Education Fund for Israeli Civil Rights and Peace, and that Cy played a critical role in the merger of the Education Fund and Americans for Progressive Israel, Hashomer Hatzair, to become Meretz USA. And even more than that, Cy was active in the broader Jewish community relations, the Jewish community relations community, both locally and through the national reform movement. And he understood better than anyone that Meretz USA should engage the broader Jewish community and not just one another in debating the issues of American Jewish involvement in the issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict. He was one of a kind. Those of us who were privileged to know him will not forget his extraordinary qualities, his brilliance, his courage, and his impact. All of us shalom, Cy. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. You know, our father was once taking the garbage out at our summer house in the Poconos, and he walked right into a bear, or at least that's the story we tell. And your Saudi thing seems perfectly in keeping. Only he could not notice that, and only he could walk into a bear. Apparently, he got rid of the bear by looking at the bear and saying, Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Avi, that's all I have for now.
Okay, well, I mean, if we have a service that's associated with Cy Dresner that comes in under time, that will be miraculous in and of itself. But I don't want to keep you. We're going to have 6 more shots at this with probably different composition than we have tonight. But, you know, if anyone would like to speak tonight, by all means, feel free to do so. If you want to think about it and come on one of the subsequent nights, that's great too. If you want to send me an email and you don't feel like speaking publicly, you can just send an email to me, avidresner7@gmail.com, if you would prefer to do it that way. So I sort of feel like an auctioneer, you know, going once, going twice. But I'm okay if nobody has anything else to say, and I'm okay if somebody does. So this is your shot if you want to. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow night.
Avi, I have a message from Israel I could read out loud if you'd like, from Zahava Galon.
Please.
It says, please accept my condolences to Cy's family and to Partners for Progressive Israel, which, by the way, was Meretz USA before it changed its name to Partners for Progressive Israel. Sai and I met many years ago when I founded B'Tselem during the first Intifada. Over the years, we remained in contact while I served in the Knesset and later as chairman of Meretz. It was an honor to meet a man who was an inspiration to me and others fighting here to end the occupation and to ensure that human rights are protected for all. We do not give up. The fight will continue. We will cherish his memory. Zahava Galon, president of Zulat now. That is where she is now. So
Thank you, Karen.
thank you.
Anybody else? No? All right. Fair enough. So we will be doing this again tomorrow night, same bat time, same bat channel, 7 p.m. And our leader, our service leader tomorrow is Cantor Ramalis. Our speaker tomorrow is Rabbi David Saperstein, who was the head of the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism in Washington, DC, which is the lobbying arm of the Reform movement. David was named an ambassador by President Obama. I believe it was an ambassador for religious tolerance, something like that. David can tell us tomorrow. I had the privilege of interviewing David in the conference center of the Religious Action Center in DC. The day after I had the privilege of interviewing Senator Cory Booker back at the end of April of last year. And I was interviewing him in the very conference room where the Civil Rights Act, substantial portions of the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65 were drafted in that very room. And that's where I interviewed David. The Dalai Lama had his first Seder, I believe, in that same conference room. So hallowed halls, to say the least. And David was an excellent interview, an excellent speaker. So you're not going to want to miss what he has to say tomorrow. And anything else before we go? No? So I just want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Rabbi, for leading us tonight. I want to thank everyone who spoke, everyone who didn't speak. You still have a shot if you want to, or send me an email. And otherwise, we'll see you here tomorrow. We wanted to beat the storm tonight, so we stayed in Wayne. We're staying at Dad's apartment on Hamburg Turnpike in Wayne. And tomorrow, we're all heading back to my house in Massachusetts, where I have not been for 3 weeks. So I'm looking forward to that homecoming. I haven't seen our chinchillas for 3 weeks, even though they're Jewish chinchillas, so I call them chinchillas. And so you'll see a different backdrop tomorrow night. And we'll be there tomorrow. We'll be there till Friday, I guess. Friday, there's no Shiva. And then tomorrow we'll go home on Friday. So she'll be joining us from her house Saturday and Sunday night. So thank you. Good night, and lehitraot until tomorrow.
Litraot, and thank you.
Thank you.